gave such inspiring words just now. I work for an organization called Worldreader. We're a global edtech organization that really has a mission to create a culture of reading so that everyone can be a reader. But first, I'd like to acknowledge and applaud the patronship of Princess Diwa Kumari and the royal family of Jaipur for this conference, and obviously for Dr. Swati and Mr. Samblani for organizing this. What a joy to look at all of us as practitioners in this room coming together around a topic so critical for the next generation. Indeed, our children, our future, it is the most apt slogan that we can imagine. When I look into the future, I think early childhood right now is so instrumental, because when I'm in my 60s or 70s, right, who are the leaders going to be? Will we have trained the leaders we need for that age? Will they have the skills that they need to make us a more profitable and inclusive environment and society around the globe? When you interact with children, do you often hear the stories that they will tell? As a mother of 2 children, you'll get to meet my son Julian here on your left. He's 6, and my daughter Estelle. When I tell them stories, I often think, what are they going to remember of what I've said? And sometimes I hope maybe they'll remember me being a little bit funny, which I'm not normally. But I think actually they're going to remember the stories that I've imparted, a bit of myself, where I was more engaged, something that they'll take to heart. And in today's challenging world, how do we give that hope to our children to understand how they can engage most effectively in society? And it really begins at birth, right, as parents. As parents and caregivers, our primary responsibility, as we all know, is to provide that protective and nurturing environment in those early months and young ages. And we have this bond, right? We have a genetic, we have an emotional bond as parents and caregivers with our children. And in that bond, we develop new strength, new wisdom, and the ability to actually be a teacher of our children. Oh, is this just going on? Here's Bluetooth. Teacher of our children. I think that's really important. We've talked a lot about teachers, and really the first teachers are ourselves as parents. You'll likely remember, for all of us, that before we were parents, right, we had no idea how difficult it was going to be to actually rear children, to help train them in ways that we wanted them to develop good practices. But boy, it was exhausting. The tireless nights, no sleep. But we actually began to see how rewarding it is, right? When our child takes their first step, the first words, when they roll over, and you start to see those, and you realize that you are actually engaged with them in their world. On the plane from Washington, D.C. to New Delhi, there was a grandmother holding her 9-month-old grandson. And she was making sounds and talking to him, and every time she made this one sound, he would giggle and giggle with delight. And I thought, here this is. They're forming a bond. We're, 40,000 feet in the air. And actually, it's not just the 2 of them. Suddenly, the whole row lightened up. We were all smiling. We were all engaged in that experience. Obviously, as parents, we need to teach the basics. We need to teach them how to eat properly, what the foods. We need to protect them while we cook from the fires. And of course, there are all the stories that we tell and share amongst ourselves on how we toilet train our children, right? Those are sometimes long hours, long months. And obviously, as parents, we've had woes and challenges, but hopefully we're actually witnessing the successes of how our stories that we tell them are inspiring them with an idea of why we practice certain things, why we choose to do things. And so how do stories, what do they build for our children? First, they build language development. Building that cognitive development that we know how to build to develop their language explosion and comprehension. The more creative and descriptive our stories, actually the larger their vocabulary. They start to see things in new ways. But it also builds emotional intelligence. Children learn expressions, right? They learn from our eyes, our cheeks moving, our voices. My children know, before I've even said 2 words, if I'm about to cry when I tell a sweet story or so forth. They can hear the link with the emotions to the words. But stories also build moral understanding. The stories that folktales guide us as parents, they help us translate what is right and wrong in the world, how to understand situations, how to make better choices. I was recently reading a little folktale from the Fables of Bidpai about the story of the tortoise and two geese, right? There are two geese and a tortoise in the pond. The pond has run dry. And the geese said, we're going to fly off and look for some water. And the tortoise says, please do not leave me. And they said finally, okay, as long as you agree, right, to hold on and not to open up, not to speak, we will ensure that you get to safe ground and to water. And as the tortoise, they began to fly, and he saw something that he became disgruntled about, and he let go. And we know, right? There were help coming, and he chose to look more into himself. So stories build moral understanding, but they also build empathy, right? Empathy is so important in today's world. Children, when they start to see stories, or hear stories rather, of children from around the world, they begin to see themselves in new ways. They also see that they're part of a larger community. They're part of the globe. And they begin to develop, hopefully through stories and the exposure, that each person is unique, everyone is to be respected, and we're all to contribute, that they're contributing as part of society and their community. And stories build self-confidence and resilience. Both two very critical skills in today's world, particularly resilience. Obviously, you know, they hear a story about wanting to be a superhero. You can see the young men and women running around with their capes trying to act it out. They can imagine themselves in new worlds. But they can also hear the plight of a child who has lost the story of a child who's lost their mother or father, and realize that that child goes on. And we've just heard some amazing stories from Dr. Simbal around that. Building that resilience as a child to be able to cope in life. It wasn't too long ago that I heard a story of a young 12-year-old girl who had been part of a program in Zambia. And she was in a rural part of Zambia, and she said, she was reading some stories, and she said, for the first time in my life, I see a girl in this story that's just like me. And she's gone on to be a doctor. I think I could do that too now. Really inspiring that self-confidence, opening the doors for her. Stories are powerful. Now, I doubt anybody in this room would have disagreed with anything I've just said, but if you do, please let me know. But most importantly, we're busy. We are busy, and most of us have very demanding jobs. Even directing or being a teacher, working in health centers, working in management, takes time. It takes time to sit, to find those 15 minutes with your child or with children, and to begin telling stories. So are we actually telling enough stories today to our children? Surveys show clearly that there's a lack of age-appropriate reading material in Indian households. It's the case in many countries, actually, and even in the US, in many of our urban cities, there aren't enough resources available to families to actually begin telling stories and reading to their children. But technology has made it possible for us. In your pockets, in your purses, we all have this, right? A mobile phone. Very, very powerful tool. 9 years ago, Worldreader asked a question as it launched. How are we going to create this culture of reading, that everyone can be a reader? As a global edtech organization, we've provided digital reading throughout 48 countries, bridging the most appropriate technology for the country, for the context, with the appropriate reading materials, and obviously training teachers and facilitators and librarians on how do you actually integrate technology in a smart and positive way in that process. 3 years ago here, through our evolution, Worldreader asked itself another question. Could we actually bring digital storybooks with mobile technology and engage entire communities in India to read to young children, the ages 0 to 8? So where did we start? We started with what we know to be critical, and that is the curation of books. We worked with international and local publishers to create a library, high-quality digital books in both Hindi and English. Our kids' collection now has over 550 books, and this collection is a combination of picture books, pattern books, nonfiction texts. And it's all been independently reviewed by an early childhood development expert for gender, illustrations, content, and it aligns to the National Curriculum Framework. So then we placed it on our Worldreader Kids app. Our reading app was designed for parents. The app was designed to be actually used within the household. And it was designed specifically to work on any internet-connected phone, but also to work offline. And it's available on the web or it's available on the Google Play Store. Since 2015, our programs have reached over 205,000 households here in the Delhi area. We're ensuring that we work with partners. We work through networks of healthcare centers, preschools, daycare centers, because we really value as Worldreader as our partners to actually add value to your organizations and your work. That we can turbocharge the impact that we can have with these young children. A significant component of what we do is actually to promote the value of reading and to directly read to children. We believe in the power of traditional and digital channels to promote this. We've used local cable TV, we've used billboards, Facebook and YouTube as well to bring awareness to the importance of actually reading to your children and to download this app so that they can begin to read very easily in their homes with their children. So I'm going to play for you a video in just a moment, and it's really a story that a child is telling to his schoolmates, a story that he's heard from home, and he's beginning to share and to get his classmates excited about what he's learned.
तेरा टिफिन कहाँ है? भूल गया। फिर तो तू भूख से मर भी सकता है। तू अपना टिफिन उसके साथ शेयर क्यों कर रहा है? मेरी मम्मी ने अपने मोबाइल से एक कहानी सुनाई थी, जिसमें एक आदमी एक भूखे साधु के साथ अपना खाना शेयर करता है और वो भूखा साधु गॉड बन गया। फिर क्या हुआ? गॉड ने उसे 3 विशेस दी और कहा कि शेयर करना अच्छी बात है। तू गॉड है क्या? डियर पापा मम्मा, कहानियाँ बच्चों का पहला स्कूल होती है। अपने 6 साल तक के बच्चों के बेहतर मानसिक विकास और उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए उन्हें रोज कहानी सुनाए। कहानियों के लिए अपने फोन पर readtokids.com टाइप कीजिए और आज से ही अपने बच्चों को कहानियाँ सुनाए, क्योंकि आज की कहानी है कल की तैयारी। readtokids.com।
You have to admit they're cute. Cute, but also very powerful to tell a story to each other. But we also recognize we can no longer ignore the early grade classrooms, and it can't be an information one way. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, that it needs to be an interactive, supportive classroom environment. We also see that we can strengthen the presence and use of stories in preschools and primary schools. Our early childhood development offering pulls from this rich collection of books. We've mapped it, as I noted earlier, to the National Curriculum Framework. And what we're really trying to do is to storify classrooms, to really bring that story-based learning back into the classroom for kids. It's a whole kit ready to power up preschools and early grade classrooms. While it starts with stories, it also goes into the learning reinforcement activities for children in their homes. From preschools and schools in Delhi to rural night schools here in Rajasthan, to remote schools in the Spiti Valley, many teachers and facilitators are actually daycare facilitators are using our Worldreader app to create a rich learning environment for their students. So let's all try this in our own homes, schools and preschools. So I want to call on you for a 30-day commitment. Right here, I've just opened our app. I have a book, How the Tiger Got Its Stripes. We're probably all very familiar with that. How long does it take to read 3 or 4 sentences to your child to bring that story to light? So I want to encourage us today to think about it using our phones in a new way, not necessarily for games, but really as a way to enlarge our own storytelling experience, to enlarge the vocabulary for our children. Really simply, it's one parent, one teacher, one daycare facilitator, one storybook, one child, one phone at a time. On your table, we have we've put some overview of our program. But most importantly, we look to see how we can actually turbocharge your work with you and really bring stories back into that very early stage of our engagement with children that we serve and have the privilege of being with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Chandler. For the felicitation, I